Brandon Kingsley's knees hit the icy pavement with a sickening thud. One moment, the 54-year-old millionaire investor was striding down a busy Chicago sidewalk, his mind on a big deal. The next, a sharp pain knifed through his chest. His vision blurred. A jolt of fear gripped him as he stumbled and collapsed in the dirty slush. The world tilted sideways. People gasped and stepped back. A few fumbled for their phones. The bitter wind howled down the street as Brandon's consciousness ebbed. He could vaguely hear panicked murmurs over the city noise. Strangers formed a loose circle around his crumpled form. No one moved to help. In a haze of pain, Brandon dimly felt a new kind of fear, the terrifying loneliness of dying surrounded by people who only watched. A grizzled figure shoved through the ring of onlookers. Walter Doc Hargrove, 62 years old, homeless, with a scraggly gray beard and layered, threadbare clothing, knelt beside Brandon with calm urgency. His calloused hands didn't tremble as he checked for a pulse on Brandon's neck. Nothing. The crowd's anxious chatter swelled, someone's camera light glaring on the scene. But Walter's focus was absolute. "Call 911 now," he barked, voice firm and authoritative. Startled, a bystander fumbled out a phone to dial emergency services. Walter tilted Brandon's head back, clearing the airway like it was second nature. Decades ago, in the jungles of Vietnam and the deserts of Iraq, they had called him Doc for a reason. Old instincts kicked in. He interlaced his fingers and began chest compressions, counting under his breath. Each press was firm and steady. Brandon's face was ashen, lips tinged blue in the cold. Time seemed to stretch thin. Walter continued CPR with gritty determination, sweat beading on his brow despite the frigid air. For a horrifying moment it looked hopeless. Then a faint cough rattled from Brandon's throat. Walter almost sighed in relief but kept going until, at last, Brandon's eyelids fluttered. Sirens wailed in the distance. Help was on the way. When the ambulance screeched to a halt, paramedics pushed through. Walter fell back to let them take over, chest heaving from effort. One EMT, a young woman, glanced at him and nodded in respect. She could see he'd likely just saved the man's life. As the medics loaded Brandon onto a stretcher, the crowd buzzed in stunned silence. Some had stopped recording, now feeling the weight of what they'd witnessed. A millionaire lay gasping for breath. Alive, because a homeless veteran had stepped up when no one else would. The bitter fear in the air began to ebb, replaced by awe and a sobering realization. In the swirl of red ambulance lights and falling snow, Walter Doc Hargrove silently slipped away into the crowd, his duty done. But the impact of his courage lingered. None who saw it would forget the night a man with nothing dared to do everything. If this story has gripped you so far, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. That night, Walter Hargrove sat beneath an overpass, the city's neon glow flickering in the distance. The wind cut cruelly through his threadbare army jacket, but the small fire in an old coffee can offered a little warmth. He had slipped away from the chaotic scene quietly, as he always did. In the eyes of the startled crowd he'd just left, Walter was a hero. But now, he was just a tired, aging man alone with his memories. He rubbed his trembling hands together, trying to chase away the chill seeping into his bones. Inside, a colder chill lingered. Saving that man, Brandon, had brought back a flood of feelings Walter had long tried to bury. Tonight, there would be no escaping them. As Walter stared into the dancing flames, the crackling fire began to morph in his mind into something else. Gunfire, explosions, the burning wreckage of war. His gaze went distant and hollow. Flashback. He's back in the steamy jungles of Vietnam, barely 19, knees covered in mud and blood. The screams of wounded soldiers pierce the humid air. "Doc, we need you here now," a voice yells over the chaos. Young Walter's heart pounds, but he moves without hesitation, just as he did today. A fellow soldier lies on the ground gasping. Shrapnel from a blast has torn into his side. Walter's hands press down on the wound, blood soaking through his trembling fingers. "Stay with me," he pleads, voice cracking, as he fights to keep his buddy alive. The scene shifts. Now he's in a dusty alley in Fallujah, Iraq, decades later. Gunfire echoes off concrete walls. A Marine is down, unresponsive. The same hands, older and scarred, perform CPR under a punishing desert sun. Walter's chest tightens with each memory of life slipping away under his palms. End flashback. Back under the bridge in icy Chicago, Walter jerked awake from his haunted reverie, a hitch in his breath. A car horn blared in the distance, jolting him fully back to reality. He realized his face was wet. Hot tears had cut paths through the grime on his cheeks. With a grimace, he wiped them away, hoping nobody saw, but there was no one around. Only the darkness and the quiet drip of melting snow. The memories had felt so real. Old wounds he kept hidden were freshly torn open tonight. Walter clenched his jaw and took a long, shaky breath. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to feel this much. He usually numbed it out, focusing on surviving one day at a time on the street. But saving Brandon brought it all rushing back. The purpose he once had, the people he couldn't save, and the ones he did. It hurt, but in a way, that pain was proof he was still alive. Meanwhile, across the city, Brandon Kingsley opened his eyes to unfamiliar ceiling tiles and the beeping of monitors. He was in a hospital room, propped up in a bed, with an IV line in his arm. The heart monitor's steady rhythm ticked away the seconds, a sound he found oddly comforting now. Brandon's chest ached, but he was alive. A doctor had just left after assuring him he'd had a serious cardiac episode, but was lucky. Lucky that someone started CPR so quickly. Brandon swallowed, his throat dry. In a foggy replay, he remembered collapsing on the sidewalk, the world spinning. Then just vague flashes. The outline of a bearded man hovering over him, a deep voice telling him to hold on. It wasn't a dream. Somehow, in the crowd of strangers, one stranger had actually helped. Brandon's eyes drifted to the corner of the room. On a chair sat his neatly folded designer coat, slashed open by paramedics' scissors during resuscitation. Beside it lay his phone, buzzing intermittently with messages. He reached for it, hands still unsteady, and saw dozens of notifications. Colleagues wishing him well. A news alert about man collapses downtown. There were a few texts from business associates, but none from family. In truth, there was no family to text. Brandon had spent a lifetime building companies and wealth, but in doing so, he'd let personal relationships wither away. At 54, he had a penthouse with a panoramic view of the city, a garage of luxury cars, and no one who'd drop everything to sit by his hospital bed. He realized that in this late-night moment, the only person who had been there for him was a complete stranger. He scrolled through the news alert with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Witnesses had uploaded videos of the incident online. Brandon tapped one shaky finger on a clip and watched. There he was on the ground, face gray as death, and bending over him with methodical composure was an older homeless man. The video was grainy, but you could see Walter's rugged face set in focus and the crowd's anxious gawking. Comments were pouring in, hailing the unknown homeless veteran as a hero. Brandon felt a swell of emotion rise in his chest. That man, a man he might have passed on the street any other day without a glance, had saved his life, and then disappeared before Brandon could even say thank you. Brandon lowered the phone, overcome by a profound sense of gratitude tangled with shame. How many times had he walked by someone like Walter, assuming they had nothing to offer? He never imagined his own life would one day rest in those rough, unsteady hands. Wiping a stray tear from the corner of his eye, Brandon resolved right then to find this man. He had to thank him properly, to understand who he was. Empathy and determination stirred in Brandon's chest where, only hours ago, searing pain had been. For the first time in years, it wasn't an investment or profit occupying his mind. It was another human being. There's so much more to come in this story. Don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. 2 days later, despite his doctor's orders to rest, Brandon was back downtown, determined to find Walter "Doc" Hargrove. He spent the day asking anyone he could find around the area if they knew the homeless veteran who saved him. Finally, a man pushing a shopping cart recognized Walter's nickname and pointed Brandon toward St. Mary's, a nearby soup kitchen. As dusk fell, Brandon arrived at the bustling soup hall. He felt out of place among the line of rough-sleeping regulars, but he soon spotted Walter alone at a corner table by the window, nursing a bowl of hot soup. Brandon approached cautiously, heart in his throat. "Mr. Hargrove?" he asked gently. Walter looked up, wary, until he recognized Brandon's face from that night. "You're looking better," Walter said with a faint, reserved smile. Brandon managed a small laugh of relief. "Thanks to you." He slid into the seat across from Walter. "I never got to properly thank you," Brandon began. "I owe you my life." Walter shook his head dismissively. "I just did what anyone should." They both knew most people hadn't, but Brandon chose not to argue that point. Instead, he studied Walter, noticing the army surplus duffel at his feet, the old dog tags looped on his belt. This was a proud man who had been through a lot. Brandon gently tried to draw Walter out. "The way you handled everything, you were like a pro, military medic, right?" Walter nodded slowly. "Army medic. Served in conflict zones from Vietnam to Iraq," he said simply. Brandon's voice was soft with admiration. "You must have saved so many people." At that, Walter's gaze dropped to his hands. "Not enough," he murmured. His eyes took on a faraway look. He still saw the ones he couldn't save. A flicker of anguish passed over Walter's lined face. "Some nights, I only see the ones who didn't make it," he admitted, voice strained. Brandon felt the weight of those words and stayed quiet, giving Walter space. After a moment, Brandon asked gently, "Do you have anyone, family, here in the city for you?" Walter let out a slow breath, steeling himself. "My wife was my family," he answered quietly. His fingers idly traced the rim of his soup bowl as he spoke. "Linda, she was my world." He tried to smile at the happy memory, but it faltered. "We got married after my first tour. She stuck by me through everything, every deployment, every nightmare." Walter's voice began to waver. "When I finally came home for good, I thought we'd have peace." He paused, jaw tightening. But life had other plans. She got sick. Cancer. I could stitch up a wounded soldier in the field, but I couldn't save her. His voice broke on the last words. Brandon's eyes stung with empathy. Walter continued in a rasp. "After Linda passed, I fell apart. The PTSD, the drinking. I lost our home, pushed everyone away. I've been out here on the streets ever since." He fell silent, raw pain etched on his face. Brandon reached over without thinking and laid his hand gently atop Walter's work-worn fingers. Walter stiffened in surprise, then his shoulders sagged as he accepted the simple human comfort. His grief hung heavy in the air, and Brandon's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry," Brandon said, his voice a bare whisper. Two men from different worlds sat together in shared understanding. One had nearly lost his life, the other had lost everything that made life worth living. After a long, solemn quiet, Brandon cleared his throat softly. "Walter, you gave me a second chance that night," he said. "You've spent your life helping others. You shouldn't have to struggle like this." He swallowed, choosing his next words with care. "Please, let me do something for you in return. I can help you get off the streets, maybe arrange a place to stay or connect you with the VA for support." As soon as the offer left his mouth, Walter's face hardened. He pulled his hand back from under Brandon's, pride flaring. "I'm not a charity case," he snapped, the sudden bitterness in his tone startling in the quiet corner of the diner. Brandon raised his palms apologetically. "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's gratitude and respect. You deserve a safe place to sleep at least, after all you've done." Walter's eyes flashed with internal conflict. For years, he'd survived on his own, trusting no promises. The tension between them now was taut. Walter's wounded pride versus Brandon's earnest compassion. It was a delicate bridge they would have to cross carefully, or not at all. Brandon leaned forward, voice gentle and earnest. "I'm not offering charity, Walter. I want to help because I respect you, because I care about what happens to you." Walter's eyes glistened. It had been so long since anyone said they cared. Finally, he gave a stiff nod. "All right," he whispered. In that humble diner booth, an unspoken promise was made. Walter would accept a hand reaching out, and Brandon would give it without judgment. Over the next week, Brandon moved mountains to get Walter back on his feet. He pulled strings at the VA to fast-track medical support and used his connections to find Walter a clean, safe place to live. One crisp morning, Walter stepped out of a tiny furnished studio apartment, his new home, wearing fresh clothes and a warm coat Brandon had brought him. The older man extended his hand. "I don't know how to thank you," Walter said, voice thick. Brandon clasped his hand firmly. "You already did," he replied softly. Their handshake turned into a brief, genuine hug. In that moment, two men from different worlds stood as brothers. With a roof over his head and proper care, Walter began reclaiming pieces of himself he thought were lost. At Brandon's suggestion, he started volunteering at St. Mary's Soup Kitchen in a new role, not as a weary patron, but as Doc, the medic, tending to other homeless vets and anyone in need. Each time someone thanked him warmly, Walter felt a renewed sense of purpose lighting up inside. He was helping others again, and it made him feel alive. Brandon found his own life profoundly changed. He often joined Walter on weekends at the soup kitchen, trading his tailored suit for an apron to help serve meals. To Brandon's surprise, ladling soup and sharing smiles with strangers brought him more joy than any boardroom victory. On quiet nights, he'd invite Walter over to his penthouse for a hot meal and conversation. Laughter and companionship filled that once lonely space, reminding Brandon that friendship and respect were worth more than all his investments. One snowy afternoon, Brandon drove Walter to visit Linda's grave, a visit Walter had avoided for years. Kneeling by his wife's headstone with Brandon standing supportively nearby, Walter gently brushed the snow off Linda's name. "I'm doing okay, Lynn," he whispered, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I've found my way back, and I'm not alone anymore." As he rose, Walter felt a weight lift from his heart. Brandon placed a steady hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort and respect. As spring melted the snow, Walter "Doc" Hargrove stood a changed man, and Brandon Kingsley had gained a true friend. Both men knew that night on the icy sidewalk had forged an unbreakable bond. Brandon often insisted Walter was the hero, but Walter would smile and reply, "You saved me too, Brandon." In truth, they had saved each other. Their journey proved that human worth lies in courage and empathy, not status or wealth. A man's true value is measured by the strength of his heart, not the size of his bank account. What do you think about this story's message? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. We'd truly love to hear from you.